All right, man. Thank you for returning. My name is Jeff Staten, and this is Pressing Toward the Mark. Today, we're going to tackle the topic of fear, right? We're going to tackle it, and once we get it onto the ground, we're going to rip off the mystique that it has. And once we rip off the mystique that it has, we're going to display its true face. Not what it is based upon history, not what it is based upon popular culture, but what it is true and definitely. And then you know what to do with it when you see it. All right, so let's get started. All right, man, let's get started. Like I said in the intro, we're going to tackle the concept of fear. Now, I actually did a video about a year or so ago about the fear, exactly what fear is. And throughout many of my videos, fear was a topic that I discussed. So if you followed this channel any length of time, then you know a lot of what I'm about to say. Now, let's get into it. Now, fear, what is it? All right. Fear is your mind having a conversation with your body and your spirit. Fear is informing your body and your spirit of its displeasure. Right? Your mind is empirical. Right? Your mind needs information. It needs data, right? Your mind needs to smell. It needs to taste. It needs to hear, right? And not only does it need to do all of those things, it needs to recognize what it tasted. It needs to recognize what it's hearing. It needs to recognize what it's smelling, right? And when it fails at all of those things, right, it turns around and tells your body and your spirit, man, we can't do this, right? This is impossible, right? Because there's not enough information, because there's not enough data, because the mind can't find information where you've gone through this before. It can't recognize that moment. It says to you and your body, no ma'am and no sir, right? Now, when God created man, right, he created the spirit, and the spirit is who you are. You are a spirit being, right? And God placed that spirit being inside a body, right? Pastor Dollar a long time ago used to call it a man suit. Right? God created you, the spirit, placed you, the spirit, in a man suit, right? And then gave that man suit a mind. All right? And the problem with that is that the spirit, who you are, and the mind are diametrically opposite. The essence of who you are, the essence of what your mind is the exact opposite of each other. All right? They war against each other, right? And that warring against each other that your mind and your spirit does is natural, but the trouble comes in when your mind wars against the spirit that has been given an assignment by God. Right? When the spirit and the mind starts arguing about whether or not you can or cannot do what God has assigned you, then therein lies the problem. Now, if you really pay attention to the spirit and mind conflict, it will remind you of the story of Adam and Eve, right? in the Garden of Eve, in the Garden of Eden, you had three characters. Of course, Adam and Eve and the serpent. Now, before I go any further, I need to dispel some tradition in that story. Okay? The serpent isn't who you think it is. The story of Adam and Eve was written before the concept of Satan was created. The concept of Satan as you and I know it, right? The concept of Satan being this evil, mischievous red dude with horns and a tail and a pitchfork, that variation of Satan didn't come along until several centuries later, right? The idea of Satan being evil was not established when the story of Adam and Eve was created, right? And there was no correlation at this point that the serpent and Satan were the same person. All right. Now, people believe that Moses wrote the book of Genesis. So when Moses wrote the book of Genesis and he wrote the serpent into the story, he was not referring to Satan. Again, the concept of Satan was created centuries after Genesis was written. All right. And up until the time Moses wrote the story of Adam and Eve, in several religions, not just Christianity, not just ancient Christianity, but in a lot of the religions in that area, in what's called the ancient Near East, the serpent represented a lot of things, but not evil and not Satan. The serpent during this time represented thought. You'll find in a lot of religions, again, that a serpent represented your thought. So in this story of Adam and Eve, the serpent represented your mind. It represents thought. All right. So again, Adam is in this story, and Adam represents your spirit, right? Because God had the connection with Adam. God informed Adam what he wanted him to do. God gave Adam dominion over the garden, right? So the relationship was with Adam. Okay? And Eve represented your body, because Eve was supposed to be subject to Adam. Right? And again, the serpent represented your thoughts and your mind. All right? And what happens is God would come to you, the spirit, and say to you, I'm giving you dominion. I'm making you a successful entrepreneur. You're going to be wonderful in what you do. You're going to be famous across the world. I'm establishing that kind of environment for you. I'm establishing that kind of garden for you. This will happen to you. All right? Your body understands that. Eve understands that what God said to the spirit, what God said to you, right? And what happens is your mind says, we can't do that. That's empirically impossible. Why is it empirically impossible? Because you spent 20 years in prison. There's no way you're going to be successful, right? That's empirically impossible. You have 5 children by 5 baby daddies. Who's going to marry you again? How are you going to be successful? You have 0 money in the bank. Your mind looks at empirical data. And your mind will turn to you and say that can't happen. Just like in the story of in Adam and Eve, the mind contradicted what God told Adam. All right? You will not surely die. Right? That was a direct contradiction of what God said to Adam. Right? So that's what happens. Your mind will turn to your body and say, there's no way you're gonna be successful as a business person. You spent 20 years in prison. It's not going to happen, right? Your brain says it, right? It makes sense. It's logical. It's empirical, right? Your brain turns to your body, turns to Eve. Eve says, you know what? That kind of makes sense. And then turns to you, the spirit, and says, bite that apple. There's no way that you're going to make it out here realizing the things that you've done, where you've been, what you've said. Right? Now, listen. That conversation is natural. Right? Your mind speaking to your body speaks to you. That's a natural interaction in your life. Right? The problem comes in, however, is when you agree, when Adam agrees and bites the apple. When Adam agrees, yeah, there's no way that I can do this. I can't do this. I have a criminal record long as the Autobahn. There's no way this is going to happen, right? The problem comes in is when the spirit, when you say you can't do it. Right? God didn't have a problem with the body, right? The body's gonna fall in line with which one is most dominant in the moment, right? It was created to be subject to Adam, right? But if Adam is adhering to what the snake says and what your mind says, then your body's just going to fall in place. And Eve is just going to fall in place. All right. So the problem comes in is when you adhere to what the your mind says and what the serpent says. All right. And that's when the relationship between you and God fall apart. Is when you listen to your mind, when you give into fear. Right? That's when God says, get out of the garden. No, you can't be whom I've called you to be. No, you're not going to be successful. I'm removing that calling, or I'm numbing, I'm muting that calling in your life because you're paying more attention to the serpent, your mind, and fear than you are to what I've said to you. All right? God removes the relationship at that point. Let's look at a verse, a Bible verse that kind of explains to you why God removes or backs away from us when we adheres to fear and adhere to what our mind is saying. All right, turn with me to 2 Timothy. Turn with me to the second book that Timothy wrote. And we're going to look at the first chapter and the 7th verse. 2 Timothy 1:7. And it reads as follows. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind. Okay? Let me ask you a question, right? For God hath not given who the spirit of fear? Correct. Us. Who are us? Us are Adam. Yes? Us are Adam. Right? So God has not given you the spirit. God has not given you, Adam, the spirit of fear. God has not given the spirit being the spirit of fear. In other words, you were not created to adhere to your mind, to the empirical addiction of your mind, right? You were not created a spirit that is controlled by fear or controlled by the mind, right? He says, but you were created a spirit of power. You were created a spirit of love. And this is the operative words now. You were created a spirit of sound mind. Now, sound mind means a spirit of self-control, a spirit of discipline. All right. Now, a person that lives a self-controlled life is a person that controls both his body and his mind. A spirit that operates in self-control controls both Eve and the serpent. All right? And it's because you have power over Eve, you have power over the serpent, you have power over your body, you have power over your mind. When you adhere to your mind, you adhere to fear, you are behaving unnaturally, unlike God has created you. All right? When you give yourself over to your body and your mind, you in turn have relinquished that connection between you and God. Again, God had the relationship with Adam. God is connected to the spirit, right? The commonality is with the spirit and God, right? So as long as there is a connection between the spirit and God, between you and God, God controls you, which then controls Eve, which then controls the serpent. But when you sever that connection by adhering to fear and what your mind says, God is removed from controlling you, Eve, and the serpent. You, the body, and your mind. All right? Because what happens is when you adhere to fear, you are elevating what the serpent is saying over what God is saying to you. Right? You have elevated the obstruction. You have elevated the problem over what God said you can and what you will do. And that's the true nature of fear. When you elevate what your mind says over what God said you can do, you are operating in fear. And that's what happens every time we're in fear, right? God says go. Your empirical mind, the serpent says you can't go, right? How are you going to go? You have a wife that doesn't even like you going to work, right? How are you going to go? And your husband doesn't even want you driving, right? All these empirical obstructions, and you adhere to them. You say you validate them and say, yeah, well, I can't do that. That is what true fear is. All right. Let me show you an example of that. Turn with me to Psalms. Turn with me to Psalms, the 23rd chapter. I think we may have read this one once or twice, yeah? Turn with me to Psalms, the 23rd chapter and the 4th verse. Psalms 23 and 4, and it reads as follows. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Now, this is David standing his ground. This is David saying definitively, I'm not going to listen to my body, and I'm certainly not going to listen to my mind, right? David listed the empirical obstructions. David says, I'm in a valley, number one, right? And I'm not just in some random valley. I'm in the valley of death, right? And not only is death somewhere around in this valley, it is so close to me that I am standing in its shadow, right? You know you're close to someone when you are standing right in its shadow, right? So death was really close. And David understood the empirical obstructions, right? But David said, I am not going to listen to that. I am not going to listen to what the serpent says. I'm certainly not going to listen to what my body is saying. I will not fear. I will not elevate what my mind is saying. I'm not going to elevate what fear is telling me over what God has told me and has shown me. David says, because thy rod and thy staff are with me, I am comforted, right? The rod represents protection. Those shepherds used to take that rod and beat off things that was attacking the sheep, right? The staff was this long hook thing, and he would guide the sheep with the staff, right? So David is saying, I understand the empirical obstructions. I'm not listening to them because I have God's protection and his guidance. I understand the relationship that God and I have. God has told me I am protected. God has told me that he will guide me. I am not going to fear. I am not going to listen to what my mind is saying. All right? So, listen, that's what fear is in your life. You are raising what your mind is saying over what God has said. Right? And again, your body, you feel those sensation of fear in you because your body is just going to go with whichever side is most powerful in the moment. If the Spirit of God is stronger, and your body's going to follow the Spirit. But if your mind is more powerful in that moment, your body's going to follow your mind. And it will adhere to the mind and not move if the mind says not to move. All right? Now, listen, fear is not some demon following you. Fear is not some evil spell on your life. It's just you and the serpent warring against each other. It's just your mind contradicting God. It is just your mind in its nature being who and what it is. Again, the mind needs to hear, smell, and recognize all that stuff. It needs information. It needs data. And when it doesn't have the data that it needs, it then tells your body and the spirit, we're not going to do this. Right? And if you adhere to it, that's true fear. If you don't go because of what your mind says, you are in fear. All right? Listen. You are not a spirit of fear. You are the spirit of love. You are the spirit of power. And you control your body and your mind. You have self-discipline. You have self-control. Right? Because that's who God created you to be. Right, man? Don't allow your mind to take away your promise. Don't let your mind take away what God said he will do, is going to do for you. Don't listen to that serpent. The serpent only knows what it can sense. That's it. It doesn't understand spiritual things, right? You control your body. You control the serpent. All right, I gotta go. I hope you understand what I've said today. You are powerful. You have the ability to do great things, and what God has said to you is true. Don't allow the serpent to make you bite that apple and God remove or mute or delay what he has promised for you. All right, I gotta go. I say it every week. I mean it every week, including this one. Thank you for showing up. My name is Jeff Staten, and this is Pressing Toward the Mark. One love.